welcome to Hackney Libraries. First up, I'm just going to do a few housekeeping notices. Because we're still in our pandemic, if people could wear masks around, that's unless you're exempt or choose not to, that's fine. We also do have sanitizer at the front and... Oh, can you not hear me? So, can you hear me now? Yeah. Right, let's start again. Right. We are asking people to still wear masks, to continue to wear masks because of the pandemic. We have some spares at the front, as when you signed in, and we have hand sanitizer. So the bathroom is just through those it's just through those double doors there. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if the fire alarm does go, just follow me. I'll take you out of the building safely. We've got snacks, refreshments for people, but because we're in the Hackney archives, we have to be very careful because some of our items here are irreplaceable. So please don't balance red wine on bookcases and things like that. But that's fine. But do help yourself to the snacks; they're all over there. If you haven't signed in, just sign in at the front. We are filming today, so please tell us if you're not happy with being on the film. We're filming for Hackney Libraries, but also for a documentary that's being made. Yeah. So, more interesting stuff now. We're here to welcome Selma James. This is our first Black History Season event for Hackney Libraries. And we're very excited to welcome Selma. She's going to be talking about her new book, Our Time Is Now, in relationship to CLR as well. So Selma will be talking for 30 minutes and then there'll be plenty of time to have discussion and questions and answers. We are in Dalston CLR James Library and this evening. It's named after CLR James and Selma's husband. And Selma played a significant part in the campaign to keep the name when the new library was built and opened in 2012. So it's very apt that you're here with your new book, Selma. So a little bit about Selma. Selma James is the founder of the Wages for Housework Campaign in 1972 and is the international coordinator of the Global Women's Strike. An activist since her teens, she continues at 91 to press for women's rights and for a care income for all those caring for people and for our environment. Her books include Our Time Is Now, Sex, Race, Class, and Caring for People and Planet, all available at Crossroad Books. At the end of this evening, Selma will be signing books so that you can take them away and read them at your leisure. So, welcome, Selma. Over to you.
I'm sorry, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. And my son had not seen the CLR James redone library until now. CLR was his stepfather for most of his childhood. And so it's an occasion for us as a family to come. And I do wish that some of the people who are active, who fought for the name of the library when it changed a venue, that the name remains CLR James Library, because it was a power for people to have a prominent man of color who was still contributing to the community even in his late 80s. And we didn't want that taken away from the population. They wanted it, and therefore we wanted it. And we won, and I'm very glad to celebrate being here. I said I think it was in the last book, Our Time Is Now, that CLR had two masterpieces, and one was the Black Jacobins. It's a history of the Haitian Revolution, the first country, the first set of working class people who didn't have wages to take their freedom and start the ball rolling for North and South America to rid itself of the scourge of slavery. And that is a masterly book, and the proof of that is that Thabo Mbeki from South Africa read it and said, I knew that we would be free when I read this book. And the reason, he told that to President Aristide of Haiti when President Aristide was thrown out of his own country and had to fight, the movement had to fight to get him back. And I knew that people in many countries who could read English, or even if some parts of it were translated, felt that this was the book that showed that the movement can win under the most horrendous circumstances, and therefore it was a power for that movement. And I think it's terribly important that writers and historians always use that as their standard. Their books have to empower people, that is, make them understand how much power they might have if they make the effort and organize for their liberation. So the first masterpiece that I think CLR gave us was Black Jacobins. But the second is in a way more interesting, because I think the organization that he formed of working class people in the United States, which I grew up in, I was in it from the time I was 15, was a masterpiece making inroads into the way all of us think and organize and relate and make politics our own. And I'm going to tell that story because it's exciting in itself, and I'm trying to recruit people to organizing to overthrow capitalism. That's the only serious thing to do nowadays, on the one hand. But on the other hand, to tell you how we at the Wages for Housework Campaign have used the ideas of CLR in ways that I experienced and learned from him along with other people, and how practical and important his ideas were. Now they're superseded. There's more to say now. His quotes outdated, but only in one sense. In another sense, which I hope to show, what his ideas were then are enormously relevant today and can be used by us, those of us who are golden oldies like myself, but the youngsters as well. If there's a good way to organize, it usually can be shaped by the particular situation and the particular moment in time and the particular place in which it happens. You can use that and adapt it so that it's useful to you as well. Now I'm going to take many of the moments in his life that I wrote up in the first anthology. Sorry, is that better? Yes. In the first anthology called Sex, Race and Class, The Perspective of Winning, I have a piece on him, a longish piece, and I tell the story of his involvement in politics. I'm going to do some of that now, but much more briefly, and with much less detail. In 1932, he was an intellectual in Trinidad and Tobago, which was a colony, part of the Caribbean islands, one of the a colony as part of the British Empire. He left because he wanted to come to Britain. the font of all knowledge and all publishing. And so he took a couple of books that he'd written in his bag and took the ship and accepted the invitation of Leary Constantine. Some of you may know him. He was a great cricketer. And Leary, when he'd been back in Trinidad, because he was playing where you get money for playing, which is in Britain, in England anyway, he said, look, if you come to England, I'll put you up and you'll find your way and you can do your writing and whatever you want to do. CLR went to Nelson, where the family, the Constantine family was, and made his way, but he was quickly involved not only in cricket, but in politics. And he had a friend that he was always telling that he wanted to write a history of the Haitian Revolution. He had some idea about that. And the guy one day said, listen, you're talking about it all the time. Why don't you just go there? How much money do you need? He said, I need £100 to go to Paris to do the research. The guy said, well, here's 90. And he was off. When he got to Paris, he immediately found people to discuss with and went through the archives. He was fluent in French. His education was very good because he went to Queen's Royal College, and QRC was a good school, as they say. And he found that there was a general strike of Parisian workers that were going on right when he was there. And so he saw a great mobilization of French working class people, and they had made the Paris Commune 60 years before, and they had, you know, quite a revolutionary history. That seems to have had a big impact on him because he saw people taking action against the Nazis who were about to have some kind of a coup in Paris, and he saw that they had worked out their business and they won. The coup was averted. He came back to London, and when he wasn't reporting cricket in the summer, he was writing, and the first thing that he wrote was a play about Toussaint Louverture, who led the revolution in Haiti. And he hadn't done the research. He'd done research, but he hadn't really got it together to write the book. But he wrote the play. It appeared a few times. Paul Robeson was in it, who was no mean actor, really an important person in the black world in particular. And he wrote something at the end, at the beginning of the play, which I've asked Sam to read to you. This is a little instructions to the actors.
Can you take the mic?
August 6th, 1791. The depths of a forest. A little clearing is dotted with groups of Negro slaves. They, the Negro slaves, are the most important characters in the play. Toussaint did not make the revolt. It was the revolt that made Toussaint.
Now that's already years ahead of where he had been just a year or two before that. He begins what will be the central theme of his life, of his work, of his political activity, of his leadership. I want to use that word because we're not talking about Keir Starmer, you know, we're talking about leadership. And we're not talking about that joker who says that he's the Prime Minister. We're talking about people who want to lead people in the direction that they want to go. they are getting together and they want someone to pull them together to represent them and help them to work out what is needed for them to change their situation and in fact to change their world. And he started, before writing the Black Jacobins, he had already decided that the central characters were the slaves. It was the slaves that made the revolution. You know, you could not find a book until very recently that would have that point of view. Not that there was a leader, and there was, Toussaint was a leader, but that the actual revolution was made by what we usually call the people, or the grassroots, or the working class, or the women, you know, the people who get it together. And he understood, first of all, because he was doing work on Haiti and saw what had actually happened, but also because he had seen the Paris people get themselves together. Now, I want to say that it's also very unusual, especially at that time, to equate working class people in Europe who are used to working for wages, if they're men, and people who are slaves. And there was a debate for years that went on. Are the slaves working class? It was capitalism, but it was just nonsense that intellectuals get on with, and don't take into consideration that people who are enslaved, either with or without wages, who are working under a master, either a democratic master or a dictator, as in slavery, but I think they're all dictators, you know. Anyway, that there are strands that run through populations and experiences that result in people organizing in very similar ways wherever you are and whatever the particular work is. CLR had no problem with that. He said they were as close to a working class, they were closer to a working class than anything else in the world at that time, where the Ford factories had not even been invented, but that they were together, they were exploited, and they organized as people who worked together and understood that they had to move on behalf of their liberation. And that was the central theme that made Black Jacobins the tremendous weapon it was for so many people in struggle in South Africa, in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, in the United States, in fact, in other places too, where some of it was translated. In 1938, he published the Black Jacobins, and interesting to note, 3 years before Black Jacobins was published, Black Reconstruction was published, another masterpiece about the liberations of slaves by themselves, and in fact the way, not Lincoln, but people who had been slaves, they freed themselves, and he says in the book, they freed the United States for democracy. And that was 1865 when that happened. Okay, CLR went to the US in 1938. By that time, he had become part of the left in Britain. He had these ideas and this experience, and he had cricket, a way of making his living. By the way, he worked for The Guardian, and in London, the Times was the first, had the first seat in the press box. But in Manchester, the first seat was for the Manchester Guardian. and it was covered by a black man, and that was absolutely astonishing in the 1930s when that took place. He told us that a couple of times because he laughed at how the world had changed. At that time it was revolutionary to have the first seat. Now it probably isn't, but then again you have to look and see. He went to the US to report, on a lecture tour for the Trotskyists. He had become a leader of the Trotskyist movement almost overnight, but he was very educated. He knew a lot. He was quite brilliant, and he had a good sense of humor too. And he found his way. He was always interested in people. You know, I'd bring people home and, you know, I met them somewhere and he would start to say, and where are you from? Oh, who were your parents? And there would be a lively discussion about that person and he would discover wonderful things about them. But he was educating himself. And when they left, he said, you see what that woman said? She said this and this and this and this means this and this and this. And he had made a whole analysis of who she was and what she was thinking and what an interesting person and what an interesting life. He spoke about the British Empire when he went to the US. He had these lectures. They didn't know anything about the British Empire. They were busy building the American Empire. But in addition to that, the issue about which the working class had to make up its mind was race in the US. And it was the empire in the UK. I was very struck by that when I came to England some years later. But while he was in the US, there was a split in Trotskyism. He was a Trotskyist. He was a leader, one of the leaders of the Trotskyist movement. And I don't want to go into all the ins and outs here because it's boring to relate. But he decided that of the two wings of Trotskyism, one tended to be supporting the Soviet Union, and the other supporting the American state, as it turned out, supporting the war in Vietnam in a few years' time. But he saw the tendencies, and he said, I'd better get back to England because I have people there, I have my books there. Somebody had started a bookshop on the basis of the books that he had left behind. He didn't think that he could handle the situation politically in a country where he was not familiar with people and not familiar with the lives they led. And he was met by people who said, stay, we want you here, we'll help you, we'll support you, and we'll form an organization. And he did stay. And one of the things that he did, because he had to do some work somewhere else, was to sit down when he had time from his job and study Hegel and Marx. He said, this thing has not been done recently, we have to look at it. And he studied it and wrote a document, in fact, a book that Margaret Busby published, she's here with us, in 1980. Is that right? It had been out of print for some, it had never been published, in fact. It had been in manuscript form, and it's a study of Hegel and the dialectic for people to understand. You know, Hegel is dense. But he wanted to make it available, and he wanted, as an organization was forming itself, he wanted them to know what Marxism was, not this nonsense about a vanguard party with some intellectuals get together and tell some working class people what to do. Being short and sweet, but very close to the mark. And what he had discovered, first in Paris, and then in the Haitian movement that ended slavery, he discovered that the organization had to represent this fact of life, that if the people have to make the revolution, then the movement must express that, and the organization that you form must be based on this, what he called self-activity. Now, some of these words we know now, but they were relatively new then. And I must say, it's a fascinating book, and it's out of print, and we're trying to get the publishers to get the damn thing out. And by the time he was finished, this organization that had come together had a basis. We had some idea of what we were trying to do. I joined it in 1945 when I was 15, and it was called the Johnson Forest Tendency. It was still within Trotskyism. We hadn't split with them, but we had our own way of viewing things, and we didn't argue with them. We tried to get on with our political activity, but not go on and on with debates. We put our stuff on the table. We said, this is what we think. We're not discussing it now. There's work to be done. But this, in case you want to know, this is what we stand for. And we worked with them as much as we possibly could. And then by 1951, a number of things had happened. Some of the people in the organization had done all kinds of work. We were holding our own little meetings, for example, on the abolitionist movement in the United States, because he felt, and he was right, if you want to deal with what was called the Negro question, but we now call racism, then find out about the struggle against racism from the bottom up. And the struggle against racism was, first of all, the struggle against slavery in the United States. They built a tremendous organization of runaway slaves and people who were half-free and white people who were dedicated, and especially white women, fought hard and long for the movement of abolition, which was headed by Frederick Douglass, a man who had been a runaway slave. And so in 1951, he said, our people have developed all kinds of talents. I was very interested in what was called the woman question, and other women were too. We had done all kinds of putting into a newspaper the experience of working class people that we knew and that we asked them to write for. This self-activity was really, people were saying how their life in the factory, their life in the home, women as housewives, women as factory workers, and some children also had things to say about their life at school, and young people as well. And so he said, and we followed him, because he was really a very serious leader, he said, we just have to break, in spite of the fact that we want to stay together as organizations in the Trotskyists, we can't, because our people need more and want more than that. They want to pursue their various interests. So we broke with Trotskyism and began to publish this newspaper seriously and circulate it. It was not for the intellectuals to teach the workers. It was the workers to teach each other and anybody else who wanted to know. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and I must before I go on, was that in the 40s, some people who were farmers in the South, sharecroppers, wrote to one of the Trotskyist organizations and said, "Can you come down here? We're trying to get a strike of sharecroppers and we need some advice and your help." And he went. He volunteered to go. They were black people, and it was especially appropriate that they did. And he worked with them, and he learned a great deal, and he was at their disposal. And I remember I said, "How did you get the publications and things that you needed?" He said, "Well, Booker came to me, who was the leader of that particular group of sharecroppers. You know what sharecroppers are. They grow food and have to sell it at prices that really the business people dictate. And there is really, the south of the United States was Jim Crow and racist, and this white racism just dominated. And Booker said, "We need a pamphlet," by which he meant we need a leaflet. And Nello said, "All right." And he got out some paper and a pen and ink, and he sat down and he said, "Tell me what to say." I was very impressed with that because it was standard in relation to everything he was doing. He was telling the grassroots, "Go on, I'm really here with you, but you have to do it." That's how this organization that I was part of trained me. And one day he had told me, "You should write a pamphlet about women because that's clearly what you know and are interested in." And a few months later, I hadn't done one thing, and a few months later, he said, he called me. He was in Los Angeles and I was in Los Angeles. He called me and he said, "Have you written the pamphlet?" I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I don't know how to write a pamphlet." He said, "Oh, it's very easy." He said, "All you have to do is take a shoebox, and every time you have an idea, you put it on a piece of paper and you put it in the slot at the top of the shoebox, and then one day you open the shoebox and put all the pieces of paper together." I said, "Okay," and I did it. And I took off from work, and I put all the pieces together. I took my son to the nursery school so I didn't clean house instead of doing the pamphlet. And I put the pieces together, and by 8 o'clock that night, I had the draft of a pamphlet. He had told people, "Leave her alone. Don't tell her what to do." I was an ignoramus. There's some things I knew. And he wanted me to do it. It's republished in a number of places now, that pamphlet. It's called A Woman's Place. And very recently it was published some parts of it were published in Portside, the American journal. Anyway, that's how it was. That's what he taught us. In the 1960s, the movement burst out. All the movements, first the black movement, the anti-imperialist movement had been raging since India in 47 and Ghana in 57 were independent of the British Empire. And here was the black movement in many countries. Here was the women's movement. Then there was the gay movement. Then there was the lesbian movement. Then there was the movement of people in mental institutions against the repression of the psychiatrists and all kinds of nasty things that had been happening there. In other words, various sectors of the exploited organized into movements and made their case. And I joined the women's movement, and I was immediately confronted with what I thought was a class split among women, which was not really, it was not mentioned, but it existed. And after a while, I came out with Wages for Housework, and that was really difficult because a lot of the feminists were really against women having money without going out to work. They thought that we needed our consciousness raised by joining trade unions. Well, that wasn't my view. My view was that women knew a lot, and women were entitled to a wage for the work that they were doing, and that was the work of caring for the whole human race. And that was not a small matter, but we differed on that. A lot of us didn't like that at all. You know, I feel, they said that if you have wages for housework, you'll be institutionalized in the home. And I felt if you don't have wages for housework, you're institutionalized in the home. Exactly the opposite. And finally, some of us began to form the Wages for Housework Campaign. And I found that we had to decide what we wanted to do, how we wanted to be structured. And I was trained that the grassroots mattered, and that the grassroots had to find ways to lead, and whoever was leading had to find a way to make that possible. And we did a number of things as a small campaign, a few people and maybe a few more after that. We were always connected with other countries as well, because you can't be anti-racist unless you are international. And we began to do our work we had public meetings where, not when people came to tell us what to think, but where women would get up and tell their story about their struggle, about their life. And it was always interesting. I remember one day a woman got up and said, "Listen, I killed my husband, and I was in prison for about 8 years, and I'm very sorry I did it, but I'd like to explain what happened." And she did. And people were mesmerized by the fact that a woman among them had had this experience and was able to explain it to them and explain it to herself, so that she was self-respecting, in spite of the fact that she had taken a life which was a terrible thing to do, which she deeply appreciated. But we built our organization on that basis, and on the basis of the Family Allowance Campaign, which we organized because the government wanted to take family allowance from women. And we organized a family allowance campaign, and we went with a petition asking women to sign to keep family allowance and to be paid for the first child. It's called child benefit now. And I went with a number of women, and we went on the day that women collected their family allowance. And I said, "Madam, this is a petition. The government wants to take family allowance away from women." And some would sign. And one woman said, "I don't sign anything. My husband doesn't read first." This was a long time ago, 1973, 72. And I said, "But madam, they want to take family allowance away from you." And she looked at me and she said, "But that is the only money I can call my own. Where do I sign?" And that was a big lesson to those of us who had formed this campaign, who understood that what women wanted was money, and that there was nothing wrong with women having money for work that we were doing, which was very hard work reproducing the human race, not a side issue, and that we had to find the ways in which women had got some money, like family allowance, and fight for that and extend it and have a big international campaign. This is when we first began in 1972-73. And everything we have done since then has been in the way that we were trained by CLR to do it, in this sense. A group of lesbian women said they wanted to join the campaign, but they wanted to stay together as an organization. And we said, okay, but you cannot be separatist. That is, you can be in favor of lesbian rights, but you cannot be racist or against all the other sectors that had been organizing. And we got through that, and the whole organization was transformed by a lesbian component. The second organization to work in the same way was the English Collective of Prostitutes, and in the US, the campaign was strong, Us Pros, US Prostitutes Collective. And again, no separatism, no cutting, no using your power against other sectors of workers, but developing your relationships with other sectors, but always stressing your own particular interests. The third organization that found its way to our autonomy, which we were beginning to understand, was Black Women for Wages for Housework. And that transformed, again, everything, just like the other organizations had done, only more so. Within 2 years of its formation, there was a split on race. What else is new? But only the Italian group and the New York group broke away. The rest of us were entirely anti-racist, strengthened by what had happened. We never set out to fight it out publicly, and you should have said this and you said that, and nothing. We went on with our struggle, and we went on with our campaigning, and we fought for anti-deportation. We worked against the police. We took over a church in 1982 when the police were racist and very heavy on sex workers. And we changed the climate by making the case that women need money, and that good money does not make women bad. Some of these stories of these struggles are told in the volumes that we have published. We developed our international network so that now we're in touch with thousands of sex workers in Thailand. We have a very strong campaign in Peru of domestic workers. We have an organization in Ireland trying to undermine the hierarchy in the university so that women are paid for the right wages, including from domestic work, from cleaners up to teachers and lecturers. So it's an organization of all of these, women and men, fighting against the way the university is organized, and so that women are not getting the wages that they should. So women are getting the wages they should get, and not the subject of sexism. We have a wonderful organization in India, and 100 of those women have just got the paper saying that the land that they have been fighting for, which they said was theirs, they now have a paper to prove it. 100 women, and that's part of the struggle at this moment in time in India. There's a massive strike of Indian farmers and farm workers. Millions of people having all kinds of struggles and building the power of their movement also for the climate, because that is part of what farmers especially and farm workers find they are responsible for leading. Have I forgotten? I probably forgot some countries.
The US.
Pardon?
We're going to say about the US and then the other autonomous organizations.
Yes, what other autonomous? I never remember all the organizations at the center. Pardon? Women Against Rape.
Exactly, but, you know.
Yes, Women Against Rape. Women who, we have women of color. We've changed the name. They changed their name because there are many women of color who do not consider themselves black, as once they did in this country. People of color all called themselves black. Then that changed, and now we say women of color, and that organization has grown and is more powerful and is connected with the All African Women's Group, which fights against deportation and against being in the detention centers. We want detention centers finished. And we feel that so many of the issues that we have fought and worked on are now much more popular, and the whole idea of wages for housework has been opened wide by the pandemic, which makes very clear that women's work is saving lives, not only when we are paid carers in hospitals, but when we are carers, unpaid carers in the home. That this caring work is not just a little piece of sweeping, particularly under the carpet, and laundry, but it is about taking care of the human race and being cared for by the human race. That this is what we stand for, and this is what we think the society should pay attention to, and in fact should be the focus of the society. We work in the society in businesses or in corporations or in factories or in farms too, where the plan is made for us to do this and spend our life doing what others have planned and structured for us. And we want the first work to be the care of human beings. And very recently, we are part now of the Green New Deal for Europe, which talked about caring as work to be done, and we gave it caring for the environment as well as for people, and we said we'd like to be part of this, and we will define it, and we did, and that is now part of the Green New Deal for Europe, which is anti-imperialist, by the way. And many people in the world who are subsistence farmers have understood that they are caring for the soil, especially women caring for the soil and for the people, And it's not two movements. It seems like it's two movements in a city where you care for the people, and the land is and the soil is not your province. But internationally, we now know that we must fight for both, and that's what we've been doing in a broader way, still thinking of the ideas of CLR James, but seeing how they can be molded and be what we need today. One of the groups that we've had in our network has been in Guyana, and some of you may know Undaye. She died not too long ago, over a year ago, and she had a Crossroads Women's Centre there, just like we have one in London, just like the one being built in Philadelphia, just like the one that is budding in Los Angeles. She published a book, or rather she wrote an anthology, and this book was published after she died, tragically. And one of the things that the book has that tells us something of what we need to know is that she has a history of an explosion of activity by women who were some Indian and some Afro-Guyanese. And there had been a racial divide, but when the women came together, because the government was saying what they could buy and what they could not buy in terms of where the money would be in terms of the banks, they were able to go past the divisions among them, and they brought the men into it, the farm workers, the sugar workers on the one hand, and the bauxite workers on the other, and they were able to change the situation. But she describes how that happened and the autonomy that these women were able to organize and able to win. And we also recommend, as well as the books that we have published, we recommend that. I want to say just a few other things. Number one, there's a men's organization at our Women's Center. There are a number of organizations that are part of working together. Autonomy, you concentrate on your own sector, but you make connection with other sectors, helping them and asking for their help too, so that you are stronger, but you don't lose the focus of what you came into the movement to do and to work for. And it is a tremendously important development of what CLR said when he worked out our position on what was called then the Negro question, but is really the black movement. He said, Sam, what is the phrase? The independent validity of the Negro struggle. It was a big breakthrough in the US at that time. Now we know it as a fact, the independent validity of the struggle against racism, independent of other sectors, but trying to draw other sectors in and working with others, not as the enemy, but as the potential ally. Potential, it can only be that, but it can be quickly, I find, in this day and age, it can be very quick. I think I'll leave it at that.
Oh, yes.
asked a few things.
Use the
Hold
mic,
on,
use the
hold
mic.
on.
What?
Sorry,
The
can I?
microphone. Use the mic, son.
Where is this attached? I'm sorry.
Look, I forgot when visible.
Wait.
One has not made that noise.
Put on the other mic.
Oh, somebody's
No, it's not
managed.
in my thing.
Should be
Try it, Sam. I try this one off.
You gotta, you wanna,
This one?
I spoke too long. One organization that I forgot was Women with Visible and Invisible Disabilities. The organization of men is Payday. There are a couple of men from that organization here. And I probably forgot other things too.
Single mother self-defense.
Single mother self-defense. We fight for the benefits. We are absolutely opposed to universal benefit. The £20 that they gave us, they want to take back, and we shouldn't allow it. But we have Marcus Rashford on our side, even if the Labour Party is not.
Support not separation.
Support Not Separation, an organization that fights the fact that the government takes children away from mothers and says they're being neglected, either because the mothers don't have the money to feed them as they should be fed, or because the mothers complain of domestic violence, and they say that the mothers are to blame for allowing the children to see violence in the family. The sexism is unbearable, and a lot of it comes from women who are not on our side. They have said they were feminists, but they are feminists who put their career first and not our liberation. That's a major problem in every one of the movements that we have founded. Now I really must open the floor for discussion. About? Yes, I will, yes. Somebody has to chair.
I thought the lady was going to chat. You going to chat?
Pardon?
You're not sharing this discussion. I thought you were.
Yeah, so you can open the floor. Thank you very much, Selma. That was
You want
very
to use the
enlightening.
mic? Maybe you can.
Yeah. We only have one mic, is that right, John?
Yes, we've only got to share
Okay,
one
so
plane.
Selma's really keen to get the audience talking. Let's have a conversation. Questions for Selma or views?
Disagreements.
Disagreements. So we've only got one mic. Are you okay to shout, or do you want me to run off?
You can repeat the question.
I can.
Oh, you may. I think I can shout. Sorry. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you, Selma, so much. It's just a pleasure to listen to you always. I could listen to you for hours. You mentioned CLR and his work, the Black Jacobins, which I think, people haven't read. It's a book that is beginning to be so much relevant for what's happening today in Haiti and the situation in the Caribbean and internationally, and the movements for reparations, the slavery. Haiti had to pay France for the freedom, that Toussaint has contributed so much for the region, because not only the idea that we could free ourselves that was put out there, he also supported Simon Bolivar with his revolution in Latin America. Without that support, things would not have moved in the direction that it's going in. You didn't mention one book, and I suspect it's a book that it took me ages to read, one of CLR's books, because I was into politics seriously and so on, and CLR has written a book about cricket, Beyond the Boundary. It took me years to read it. I knew about it for about maybe 10, 15 years before I actually got around to reading it, and I really think, for me, it's one of his best works. It was, just not the cricket as such. It was so much politics in there. I mean, the man's an outstanding writer. For me, a great hero for the Caribbean, but we know he's also a great Pan-Africanist. So I'm so glad you brought him alive today, so that we could go back and look at CLR's work and continue to learn from what he has written. And so yes, I just wanted to make that comment. And I'm sorry we've got to actually leave. We've got another event to attend, but we will be here to the last minute. Thank you so much.
Somebody else in the room.
Would you like the microphone?
No, I think you speak. I think you speak that.
What do you make of? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
What do you make?
He hasn't said yet.
What do you make of the situation in Afghanistan where this government and America has basically handed the lives of Afghan women back to the terrorists, or rather back to the Taliban, after 20 years of warfare and the racism that went with it? Has this exposed it to the consciousness of the public about what the war really is? How do you see it?
Do you want to take a few questions?
Well, I think that other people may want to say something about the questions, and I can say
So
something.
maybe you can ask a few questions.
Anybody like to join in with that debate, or would you like to get involved in a few different questions?
Yeah, I think maybe you should.
Would anybody like to line any other questions at the moment? Or should we do?
Yeah, you've got time up.
Some of you mentioned some of the obstacles, I use that word to describe things politely, that we face, as grassroots women organising. I wondered if you wanted to say something about one of the other really big and irritating obstacles, the NGOs and their role in how they put us down.
I think somebody else and then we
I had a quick question about the Johnson Forest tendency, which I realize might be too insider baseball-y, but I was just wondering, with you, with Rhea, with Grace Lee, was it always easy for CLR to be in an organization with women? It doesn't sound crazy now, but it does sound. It's something that I think about a lot, and I was wondering how he managed to not overstep his boundaries in organizations in the Johnson Forest tendency. I also was wondering if you could talk about. You spoke about how lesbians came in and changed the entire orientation of the organization, and I was wondering if, given the repression of trans folks in the UK, if it isn't time to sort of, or if what can be done to rearrange the organization to accommodate for fighting back against that oppression.
Okay, maybe I should. Are there any other hands up?
There's another one.
So let's take one more.
What about some women? We only had one woman and quite a few men.
Hello. I was just interested in your perspective on working within education, within increasingly overcoded environments of education by neoliberal sentiment in terms of controlling curriculums and things, and how one can work within those networks to resist those overcodings, especially with working with young people.
I think I'll take those. Okay, this
Well,
one
you
now.
have the NGOs.
Thank
Well,
you.
you have Afghanistan. But you have the NGOs, don't support some women, France, and education.
Okay, that's a good mix of questions.
Yeah, and cricket.
What about cricket?
Beyond the boundary.
Oh, beyond the boundary. Yeah.
It wasn't the
Let me do that first. I knew Beyond the Boundary almost by heart. I typed it about 7 times, and that's because there were no computers then, and I would type his draft. He wrote by hand, and then he would correct that manuscript. And I couldn't incorporate it without retyping it. And the same thing would happen more than once. So I knew the book very well. And I think some of it is great. And I loved writing about it in the piece that's in this book now. Our Time Is Now. I loved writing about it, especially about the chapter where we got a black captain for the West Indies cricket team after a great struggle in the West Indies. But I find I have mixed feelings about some of it. It's brilliant. Everything he did was brilliant. And it's important. But I feel that he did not tackle the question of class. That he did not deal with the question of class of cricket as a class weapon, really. And I have reservations about it because of that. It's a great book. I agree with you, Luke. But that's why I don't give it the 5 stars that I do with forming an organization of a new kind, a Marxist organization, a socialist organization without a vanguard and with leadership which takes it the way the grassroots wants to go and develops the people within it so that they can take you on if you're the leader. Say, oh, I don't think so. You know, a real organization where people confront each other with the truth and learn things about themselves that they couldn't find out any other way. And I'm very hooked on that kind of organization and how enriching it is for the membership. You know, I think we succeed in helping each other to learn and to teach and to grow. And I put that before Beyond the Boundary, although I love parts of it greatly. And some of it, by the way, has the great skill of the novelist. It's not fiction, but it's a novelist's way of looking at reality, which I think is absolutely crucial if you want to be an organizer. I don't mean to shock anybody, but what a novelist sees, or should see, or wants to see, is how people really are and what they really want. And that's what you need to be an organizer, my kind. You have to find out what people want, and they don't always tell you in the normal course of things. You have to find your way to it. You have to hear with another kind of ear. And there's some of that in Beyond the Boundary too, so there's really a lot to recommend it. But that's my reservation. On Afghanistan, what the hell were they doing there for 20 years? That's what...
killing people.
Pardon?
Killing people.
They were killing people. They weren't giving women power. They were finding a sector of women to... a sector of women to prioritize. But they weren't about to... they weren't about to give people a chance to change the society. And he pulled out. There's a controversy about the conditions under which it was pulled out. But one thing is absolutely clear, that when they wanted to go to Afghanistan, the feminists were absolutely gung-ho. I mean, really well-known feminists worked for the CIA to get the public to back the invasion of Afghanistan. What were they doing there? They were not there to liberate women. They were killing women. They were not giving them the means to liberate themselves. There was no case to be made for the. They came because they wanted some pipeline raised, and they also wanted an advantage against the other imperial power, which is Russia. And the whole enterprise, when I heard Biden was pulling out, I thought it was a victory for us. But it wasn't a victory for us only because they had not helped women. They had been very selective about the women they'd helped. This is a short version. We can discuss it further. But I think that we have to look again when they liberated Iraq with the shock and awe and killed thousands and left the society in tatters. But they had democracy. What democracy? It's just... We have to really turn our attention to what the U.S. and what the arms race and what the Israelis... I didn't even speak about that when I spoke earlier. Some of us are anti-Zionist. I'm a Jewish woman. I have a responsibility to be anti-Zionist because I can't be anti-racist unless I'm anti-Zionist.
Absolutely.
And I have good companions, 3 people at least here who are part of our anti-Zionist work.
NGOs.
The NGOs are the way in which the state generally has relieved itself of responsibilities. It gets done what they want done without having their name written on it. The Haitians who have waged war from then to now in order to establish their independence and keep their independence have more NGOs per population than any other country, and it's the poorest in the whole of the Americas. they had a coup against Aristide when he raised the wages of people from, I think it was from $1.50 a day to $3. He said he wanted to raise the population from destitution to poverty. And they couldn't stand it, and they invaded. And that's very much the reason for invasion. That was the coup that took place in Burma recently. They wanted to be in control of the, what's the stone?
Jade.
And that's what they did. You know, it's not for, they don't invade for us, they invade against us. And that happened in Afghanistan as much as it happened everywhere else. I was speaking with a group of young people in the US a few years ago, and I said they didn't invade Iraq to liberate them from Saddam Hussein. And this guy said, he got up and he said, what would you have done? What would you have done if you wanted to free the people from Saddam Hussein? I said, I would have dropped food. Would it cost less? Would have done more good? Would have helped the children and the mothers to feed them? And it would have given them the strength that somebody was on their side. But they weren't on their side. They were on the side of the oil companies, which is different. We have to be very careful. These people are very skilled liars, and they have networks of lies. Next.
So you had trans and dedication.
Yes, oh, dedication. Trans. We have a trans person who's part of our network, and we don't have a problem with people who take their own life in their hands to change it. That's up to them. We are welcoming. We don't have any upset. Now that's the other question. There was never a problem, as I remember it, of sexism, except the common or garden sexism that you meet all the time. I remember in the Los Angeles branch, I said, the men have to learn to type. Because the women were doing all the typing, because we were the only ones who knew how. And I had unanimous approval. Everybody raised their hand. Yes. They never did it. They never, not one of them did it. And we just wandered off, and they finally learned to type. Or else they shut up, that's all. They had nothing to say. Grace and Ray were terrific. To have a black man as the leader was really useful. It was very attractive to the black working class people, and they liked him, and he, that was really helpful. And he was interested in so many things, and that was also very attractive to people to join with you. And I can't think of a way in which he was not challenged by them. He sometimes disagreed with them, but so did I. But he was genuinely interested in other points of view. He always felt he could deal with them. And in my experience, he could. Except me, he couldn't deal with them. Well, that's to be expected. You don't expect men to necessarily agree with their wives. But he listened to me. he did give me a hearing, and he did say something about wages for housework. That's what somebody said sometime in the 80s, what do you think of what Selma is doing in this wages for housework? He said, you can't be against it. Now I have to explain what that answer means. I have to translate as the wife. It means if a group of grassroots women demand money from the state, how can you be against that? Well, you want them to keep the money? You don't want them to have the money? What's wrong with them having money? Family allowance, by the way, family allowance was the single largest rise in working class families' income when it came in 1946. Nobody's mentioned that. You know, if we have money, the families are richer. Anyway, that's a whole argument. I'm ready to speak. A number of people here would be ready to speak on that subject anytime you want to invite us. But it really is outrageous that the women who reproduce the human race are considered to be doing nothing important. How dare they? And how lacking in any humane attitude to people or for life. You know, that's my considered view. I think you'll find a lot of women on the street would agree with me.
Biden, you want to say anything about Biden?
Yes. Biden is trying to prevent Trump from winning the next election, and he has organized for all kinds of people to get money, beginning with people who are poorest. And there's a fight going on now in the United States, which the Wages for Housework Campaign, what we now call the Global Women's Strike, is deeply involved in, to keep that money, to put that money in women's hands rather than in parents' hands, which means the men will walk off with it and will empower men who are violent. Some of the men will appreciate it and give it to their wives, but not all, and not even most. Men are used to walking with the money. We know that because we experience it. And that fight is going on at this moment in time in Congress, and we heard just before we left that we have the edge, we're winning, keeping the money. But it is really, these are people who want Trump to win, Democrats, and they don't want Biden to give us money because if he does, we might vote for him rather than for Trump. And the takeover of the United States by a Nazi means the world will be destroyed. So it's not a small matter. And we're fighting all we can on that question. One other point I wanted to raise, and it probably would be the last because I see my sister here, anxious for us to get to what food there is. When you build a movement, and it's a movement we need to build, we need every part of that movement to be built, and we need it now, and we need it for the climate, and we need it for the animals, and we need it for the soil, and we need it for ourselves and for all of us on this world who see children going without food, which is a heinous crime. And we need all the billionaires, we see all the billionaires who don't care that children don't have food to eat. You know, that's why they're rich. when we see that, and we look at the movements that we try to form, we also see that some people want to use the movement not to change the world, but to change their incomes, to buy a bigger house or any house, to move up in the society, and that is the enemy of change. A movement must be for the people who are in that movement and for those they want to bring into the movement, and you cannot change the world without a movement. We just saw a movement in the Labour Party, not destroyed, because that movement has not been destroyed, but scattered, just all about but not together. And we lost a big opportunity for some people who will be nameless to beg pardon for being anti-Semitic when they weren't.
Yeah.
It's just the biggest, one of the biggest lies which we have suffered from, and our movement has been divided, and we have to bring it together. And we believe that a struggle for a care income to care for people and the planet is part of what will bring it together, because we all need that and we deserve it. So ambition is the enemy. Our mothers want us to do well. I know, I'm a mother. We want our kids to do well, but we don't want them to do it at the expense of others like themselves, because it's a form of suicide to want to stand on other people's backs. And we want them to be good people, and we want them to eat regularly, and we don't want them to be exploited, but we don't want them to exploit others either. And when you are a mother, and sometimes when you're a father, often when you're a father, a real good father, these are the things that trouble you, that worry you, that keep you up nights, that keep you making decisions all the time when you'd rather just sit back and let it all happen. And we have to be absolutely conscious of that, because we have to build this movement for change, for our lives, and for the life of our planet. We don't have another one to go to. And we've got to do it fast. And there were some things that Sam was telling me about the fact that the soil is, there used to be that radio program, and the punchline was really, I think the answer lies in the soil. Well, it seems it does. And we have to learn more about it. And if you are interested, please tell us, because we're going to put out some kind of a mailing about this. And this information that the farmers have that we're not getting because they censor so much of the truth. I'm very grateful that you came and listened to me, though I talked a long time. Thank you.
I think that people probably want to go home. They don't want to ask any more questions. They want to give you some answers. Yeah?
And an announcement as well?
Yes, please.
But we just wanted to ask people, if you're new and just met us for the first time, please leave your details at the table, because we want to keep in touch and really build on what Selma said. And I just wanted to thank Selma, particularly as an African American, that, I grew up in the 60s, and I knew about the civil rights movement, the anti-slavery movement. But they didn't, what Johnson Forrest did, built the way for the 60s, and it's an invisible part of the strength of the 60s and what we build on today. So I really thank you for that. And I also wanted our connection. I feel like that you have made us pay attention to Haiti and draw on the power of the Black Jacobins. And that's another thing, it's not taught in schools at all. And when you read the Black Jacobins, you walk tall, you realize this fantastic history we've come from. And I remember my 85-year-old mom read the book and was thrilled out of her mind. And that you feel like everybody needs to read that book, and that's something that you've brought to us through the Wages for Housework campaign. So I thank you very much. And I just wanted to finish off by saying that the climate justice movement, the care income, is a vital part of the climate justice. You know, we have to take back from the billionaires, the corporations. They are destroying the planet. And unless we take that money back, we can't win. And so that demand for the care income, the money for caring and not for destruction and killing, is absolutely essential. And it's starting to spread. And I just wanted to mention that on this live stream, there are people in Turkey, in the US. We think some people in India, where the Wages for Housework campaign has really been taking off. So we are part of an international network right here today in Hackney. So thanks again, Selma.
Thank you, Sarah. One more question.
Education, we wanted to say. Oh, education. Somebody asked about education. And
I just wanted to ask what kind of strategies you had for young organisers to look after themselves to make sure that they can survive in organising for the long run.
Well, that is a wait. Thank you.
That is a really difficult question, but I know some people are organising their way. There's a squat that I'm going to be speaking at that some young black women organise. What?
They're from that squat. They are from that squat.
Wonderful. Answer your own question, because squatting is part of how you save yourself, and it's we all have to find ways of making some kind of a living which connects with the movement, which allows us to be, dedicated. We can dedicate our time to the movement, but we want to be able to do various things as well. And I think some people are using learning skills where they can save a little here, make a little here and make a little there, and be less dependent on the job market, except peripherally. That's part somewhere. Then there's a man I know who signed up for a university, got a place in a university, and he took loans, and he never intends to pay them. I think that's fantastic. I heard it, and I didn't believe it, and then I thought about it, and I believed it, because he's doing it. And I think that's a very good way, and I think a lot of people are using that way to get an income which they're entitled to, and he has to attend some classes, but you can do that and take things that you like. You can read the Black Jacobins and write a book review. There are all kinds of ways that people are finding, in the word is interstices, in the little spaces in between. And I think that that's all we can do to keep our time our own, because the movement needs our time, and we have to find ways. There was a poet in Haiti who came to visit us just before the coup, really dealt with him and many others, and he put a poem about freedom on little cards, and he came to London because he wanted to meet the man who'd written the Black Jacobins. They didn't think they thought this is an extraordinary white man, Then they found out he wasn't white and he was a Caribbean. They were overjoyed to find it was one of their own people who hadn't done such a magnificent job. And he came and he brought us a lovely bottle of Haitian rum, which I thought was quite good. And he sold these poems for a penny, or the equivalent of what it would be for, a little bit. So it was, that's how he managed to be a poet, because he couldn't get published, but he put the poems on and that dictated, that determined the kind of poetry he did. It's very, very important. What you're trying to do really is told in what you do, not in what you think you do. You have to look very carefully at what you're doing to find out what you're really doing, and if it's what you decided to do or you got sidetracked. That's all I can offer. I'm on a pension. But I don't think people should have to wait till they're over 65 or 70 to get the money that's due them for 50 or 100 years that they've been deprived of. I do think you should find ways of campaigning for a care income for yourself, because if you're fighting for the environment, you're entitled to an income because the work you're doing is very productive. Maybe not for Wall Street, maybe not for the city, but for the world. So that's how we have to begin to look at our activity and the importance of finding ways, including, I love the way you talk about taking a house, what you call the squatting. The squatters movement has been great, and it has freed people's time to do movement work, and that is really mind-building and body-building, and I thank you for doing that.
It built our women's center.
Yeah, women's center was
Our women's center is built from a squat, starting with a squat.
a women's center. No, come back. Our women's center was built. It was a squat.
Yes, our women's center was a squat. We paid £1 a year, I think, at first, in King's Cross. The floor was not so good. The children's feet used to go through the floor. But they survived. And the women's center survived. And we did fantastic work, and we learned how to do a women's center, and how you had a rota, and what you were supposed to say, and how to organize when people came in and said, they're taking this away from me, what can I do? And you say, well, I'll come with you, and we'll get some people. And they had, I'll just tell one story, because it's such a pleasant one. The men... Solving is not here, so Solving, who were those men that came to, they said they were going to lose their house? You remember at, when we were on, the first center we had?
It was the bookshop.
What?
The bookshop. The bookshop?
No, before the bookshop. There was another center. The men that we said, come back with your wives.
Oh, that was the Bengali families.
Yes.
That's right. When we were already in the centre, the whole area was a squatting community.
Yes.
With a very
large...
And
the Bengali men came and said, we're losing our house, can you help us? And we said, bring your wife. And they said, no, but they don't speak English. We said, we'll translate. We'll find a translator, but we're not going to deal with you. You have to bring your wife. So... what happened is they brought their wives, and we organized with them. Solvig was one of the people who organized with them, and we organized a bus or a taxi or something. We all went to the council meeting, and the children were crying, and the women were shouting, and they got what they wanted. They got what they came for, and we were invited to dinner at the home that we were saving, and who was in charge in the house was the women. we thought the men weren't. No, the women, as soon as they walked through the door, the women said, do this, do that, do the other, and the men hopped to it. Because the men were running that, the women were running that family, was, you know, and the women greeted us because we had held out help for the family until the women had come to see us and come in their own behalf. There are a lot of fun you can have in that way.
Do you want to do the education?
What?
Education.
Look, the education is a real problem for this reason, and it's not news, and it is that people go to university, when they come out, they can't speak to their parents. That's what the woman said very recently, that we were having some kind of a discussion. Who was it? I can't remember. Oh yes, the other woman said, well, I can still speak to mine. But, you know, it is a problem when the education that you receive trains you out of being working class, trains you out of who you are and who you have been and who you must be, at least in part. I'm not saying you have to be stuck in the mud, not in the least. You can be brilliant if you're working class. There are things you know that the academics don't. And they're the things that matter. You know, I forgot to mention, this will help you. Johnson Forest had a school for the third layer. I never mentioned the third layer, but that was those sectors of the working class with least power, not necessarily the poorest, but with the least power, and they were the ones that we had to find out what they think. I was one of those, and my friend was one of those, and we had 2 sessions. One of us was Grace Lee, and the other, Grace McKinley, and the other was Raya Dostoevsky. And my friend said, you know, the intellectuals talk about the instinct of the working class. They have instincts too, but they're the wrong ones. And I thought Philomena, my friend Philomena, was really brilliant to say that, and because it was true. You know, you have to keep what you have and learn what you can, which doesn't undermine who you are and where you come from. And that is the problem with education. The problem with education is that people are trained to speak to each other without speaking to us, and everything they're talking about is what we work down. And then they put it in another language and say this is new and they get credit for it very often, and then they get a job telling us what to do and what to think. And I think there are ways in people are working out to break from that and to have their own study groups. And the Black Lives Matter movement has been absolutely fantastic in breaking these boundaries down and making it clear that all of us have made an experience which is worth considering, and we don't want to live in a hierarchy where those who are, quote, educated out of their class are in charge of those of us who refuse that education. It's a struggle, and another time, when there is time, we'll tell you about what the Irish member, who's a university lecturer, has been doing in Galway, making it clear that all the women, whatever their race and whatever their position, have to be free of the sexism which has defined them in different ways depending on where they are in the hierarchy. And we have to get it together. I have to tell you one thing that happened to me in my life. that I thought was very instructive. I had a reason to, because of anti-Zionism, I had a reason to go to Egypt, to Cairo, when the movement was up in, in the whole of the Middle East Spring, or whatever they called it, the Arab Spring. And I got to speak with a man who was a doctor, and he had English, and he told me that when the revolution started, he called a meeting of his hospital, and everybody came, the cleaners, the nurses, the doctors, the porters, everybody. And he said, I propose that we all have the same pay. That's revolutionary. He said, and then we'll discuss who will do what work, but the same pay for all of us. And everybody agreed, including the doctors. They said, well, yes, let's do it that way. And they began. They began to make the revolution. And the first thing they did was to destroy the hierarchy, not for voting, but for money. And that was destroyed by the military not long after that. But that's what we aim for. That's what we're looking to see and to create. And when we have that in our minds and we have that experience, that others have made, we're nourished by it. It's like we're fattened by it. We have another image, another vision of what we can be and what we can experience that is absolutely precious to keep us going in the dark days.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for signing on at home. Everyone who's been watching Facebook Live. Thank you to Selma for coming. Another round of applause. There is a collection box over there. Yeah, we also, Selma, you will be signing books for people. Yes, so we'll be signing books over here. So yeah, please have a mingle, have another drink and some snacks if you want. And thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Selma.
Thank you.